Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong simply because of how you looked? Imagine boarding a plane, exhausted from life's weight, only to be met not with kindness, but with quiet humiliation. A spilled drink, a sneer disguised as a smile, a voice that says, "People like you should know your place." But what if that passenger they judged wasn't ordinary at all? What if she was the very woman who owned the airline they worked for? Would you have stayed silent to keep the peace, or stood tall to claim your dignity? This isn't just a story about power, it's about choice, about how one woman's calm, unshakable grace exposed prejudice and redefined what respect truly means. If you've ever faced injustice and wished you could rise above it without anger, this story will remind you that quiet strength can shake the world. Stay with us and feel what happens when truth finally takes flight. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that move your heart and restore your faith in humanity. The morning sun hung low over Houston's George Bush Intercontinental Airport, bleeding gold across the polished glass of Terminal C. Inside the waiting area for Horizon Air Flight, HA-204 travelers scrolled phones, sipped coffee, and counted minutes. Another ordinary day in the skies, at least that's what everyone thought. Among them sat Dr. Naomi Carter, a woman most would overlook, mid-50s, simple gray sweater, dark jeans, hair pulled into a low, silver-streaked bun. She carried no designer bag, only a weathered canvas backpack that had seen more boardrooms and factories than beaches. To anyone passing by, she looked like a teacher, maybe a quiet professional heading home for the holidays. No one would guess she was the chief executive officer and co-founder of Horizon Air, the very airline operating the flight about to board, and that anonymity, intentional, was her favorite disguise. Naomi had built Horizon from the ashes of a small regional carrier 15 years earlier. She believed air travel could feel human again, respectful, warm, efficient without arrogance. But lately, complaints had grown louder about rude staff, mechanical service, and subtle discrimination. So she decided to see it for herself. No press release, no entourage, just a ticket in economy plus row 14A. As the boarding call echoed, groups 1 and 2 may now board. A tall woman in a navy blue uniform appeared at the gate door. Her posture screamed authority. Her smile never reached her eyes. Tina Collins, lead flight attendant, 39, proud, tired, and dangerously sure she could read people at a glance. Tina's gaze swept the line of passengers, businessmen with laptops priority, families annoyance, elderly couples extra work. And then she saw Naomi. For half a heartbeat their eyes met. Tina's expression flickered curiosity, then dismissal. She turned to the younger attendant beside her, Amber Lee, and muttered under her breath, "Another discount flyer. They always hold everyone up." Amber pretended not to hear. Her stomach tightened, but she said nothing. Naomi stepped forward, boarding pass in hand. "Good morning," she said softly. Her voice carried warmth, but Tina was already looking past her toward a man in a tailored suit. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Henderson." Tina beamed, taking the man's bag to the jet bridge. Naomi moved on without another word. The small sting of invisibility was familiar. It rolled off her like rain on glass. Inside the narrow cabin, the hum of recycled air met the chatter of passengers hunting overhead space. Naomi found her seat window side, row 14. A broad-shouldered man in his late 60s glanced up and smiled. "Looks like we're seatmates," he said, standing to help her stow the backpack. "Name's Eli Sanders. retired Navy. These trips keep me from rusting." Naomi chuckled. "Naomi Carter, thank you. Mr. Sanders, call me Eli. You heading home or heading out?" "Maybe a little of both," she replied. Eli nodded, satisfied, and settled back with the travel magazine. Naomi turned to the oval window. Beyond it, the tarmac shimmered, and the engines of a nearby jet coughed to life. She drew a slow breath. Every time she boarded one of her own planes incognito, she felt a mixture of pride and dread. Pride in what she'd built, dread of what she might find. Over the PA, a cheerful but practiced male voice spoke, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Horizon Air Flight HA-204 with service from Houston to Seattle. Flight time is approximately 4 hours and 10 minutes. That would be Captain Douglas Shaw, dependable in the cockpit, invisible in the cabin." Tina and Amber began moving down the aisle, checking bags, counting heads. Tina's heels clicked with precision, her tone clipped and efficient. "Sir, that roller bag must go overhead." "Ma'am, please keep the aisle clear." No warmth, no patience. Efficiency had replaced empathy. The very disease Naomi feared had spread. At row 12, a mother tried to soothe a fussy toddler while fitting a car seat. Tina sighed loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "Maybe next time choose a train," she muttered. A few passengers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Amber blushed and busied herself with the seatbelt demo cards. Naomi's pen moved quickly across the small notebook she carried, boarding behavior curt, tone dismissive, staff morale questionable. When Tina reached row 14, Naomi smiled again. "Good morning." Tina gave a brief nod, if it could be called that, and turned toward Amber. "Make sure we double-check meal payments in economy," she said. "Sometimes their cards don't go through." The words landed like pebbles dropped in water, small ripples spreading through Naomi's chest, a lifetime of subtle slights condensed into one casual remark. She wrote nothing this time. She simply looked out the window, lips pressed together. The cabin filled. Overhead bins slammed shut, and the safety video began to play. As the plane pushed back, Eli leaned closer. "Never get tired of that sound," he said. "Means adventure's still possible." Naomi smiled faintly. "Adventure," she echoed, or lesson, outside. The runway stretched toward the horizon, the same horizon she'd named her airline for. The jet engines roared, and the cabin trembled as Flight HA-204 surged forward. Naomi felt the familiar lift in her stomach as the wheels left the ground. Thousands of feet below, Houston's suburbs blurred into a patchwork of gray and green. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a habit she'd kept since her first test flight decades ago. May everyone on board be treated with dignity when she opened them again. Tina was walking the aisle, face impassive, already assessing who mattered. Naomi knew the next few hours would reveal the truth she'd come to find, whether Horizon Air still carried that promise through the clouds, or whether it had lost its soul somewhere above 30,000 feet. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Tina's voice came over the intercom. Professional but hollow. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our beverage service shortly. Please remain seated until the cart reaches your row." Eli glanced at Naomi, sensing something in her expression. "First flight with Horizon," he asked. "You could say that," she replied, and her smile held a secret the sky itself couldn't guess. The flight had just begun. The lesson was waiting at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign flicked off with a soft chime. and the cabin filled with the rustle of seatbelts snapping open and overhead bins clicking. The smell of brewed coffee drifted from the galley, masking the faint metallic scent of the recycled air. Naomi reached for the journal she always carried, small, leather-bound, pages slightly bent at the corners. Her handwriting was neat, almost architectural, the product of years designing blueprints before she became a business leader. She wrote a short line across the top of the page, "Observe without judgment. Note everything." In front of her, a young mother wrestled a diaper bag and a restless baby. The child's soft cries rose and fell like waves. The woman murmured apologies to the passengers around her. Tina appeared almost instantly, her polished shoes stopping inches from the woman's feet. "Ma'am, if your baby keeps crying, you'll need to calm him down," Tina said, her voice edged with steel. The mother looked up, startled. "I'm trying, he's teething." "Well, try faster," Tina replied, forcing a tight smile before pivoting toward the galley. Naomi's pen hovered above the page. She glanced at Amber, who stood frozen mid-aisle, pretending to straighten a magazine. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Amber's face colored with embarrassment. She looked away quickly, as if the simple act of witnessing kindness denied was dangerous. Eli leaned toward Naomi, whispering, "She's got the charm of a drill sergeant." Naomi smiled faintly but said nothing. "Sometimes," she murmured, "power makes people forget their purpose." Minutes later, the beverage cart rattled forward. Tina pushed it briskly, her expression fixed in the stiff courtesy of someone performing for an invisible camera. Amber followed behind, handing out napkins with trembling hands. "Something to drink," Amber asked softly when she reached their row. "Water, please." "No ice," Naomi said, her tone gentle, before Amber could even reach for a bottle. Tina's voice cut through the hum. "Amber, I'll handle this section," she ordered, sliding in front of her colleague with the precision of a guard taking position. Naomi watched the exchange silently. Tina filled a plastic cup with ice cubes, then poured a splash of water barely enough to cover the bottom. She set it down on Naomi's tray with a loud click. "There you go." Naomi looked up, calm as still water. "I asked for no ice." Tina let out a theatrical sigh. "We have 200 people to serve. Ma'am, you'll have to take what's available." The words carried an invisible message. "You don't matter." The cubes clinked in the cup as the plane hit a pocket of turbulence. Drops spilled onto Naomi's sleeve, soaking the gray fabric. She dabbed it quietly with the corner of a napkin. Eli's jaw tightened. "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm but polite. "The lady asked for no ice. It's not a big deal to fix that." Tina turned toward him, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Sir, I know how to manage a beverage service. Please, let me do my job." Her tone left no room for civility. She turned back to Naomi. "Anything else? A coloring book, maybe? Something to keep you occupied for a second." The world shrank to the sound of ice shifting in plastic. Every head in the nearby rows turned slightly, caught between disbelief and discomfort. The insult hung in the air, sour and unmistakable. Naomi met Tina's stare and simply said, "That will be all. Thank you." No anger, no tremor, just calm control. As the cart moved on, Eli exhaled, shaking his head. "Unbelievable. You should report her." Naomi offered him a quiet smile. "Perhaps, but sometimes, Mr. Sanders, the lesson is stronger when the teacher doesn't see it coming." The hum of the engines filled the silence that followed. Naomi took another note. Service tone, condescending. Emotional atmosphere, hostile. Amber returned a few minutes later, pretending to collect trash. She slipped a small bottle of water onto Naomi's tray without a word, her eyes glistening with unspoken apology. Naomi nodded slightly in thanks. The plane leveled at 35,000 feet, and the view through the oval window turned into an endless ocean of clouds. Naomi rested her chin on her hand, thinking. She remembered the first time she ever flew as a child, her father's rough hands guiding hers to the small window of a dusty propeller plane. He'd said, "Up here, everyone's equal. The sky doesn't care what color you are." But maybe people did. An hour passed. Passengers relaxed into movies and half-sleep. Tina's voice occasionally drifted from the galley, laughing with someone unseen, the laughter brittle and superior. Every now and then she'd stride down the aisle, scanning the rows like a warden doing rounds. Naomi noticed the pattern. Tina lingered near business suits, exchanged quick jokes with a man wearing noise-canceling headphones, but never once asked if the young mother needed help. The older woman, in row 16, had dropped her reading glasses earlier. Naomi had leaned forward to pick them up before any crew member noticed. Another note in her journal. Kindness deficit is measurable in seconds of hesitation. When the cabin lights dimmed slightly for the meal service, the scent of reheated pasta drifted through the air. Tina's voice carried again, this time with brittle cheer. Chicken Alfredo or vegetarian risotto. By the time the cart reached row 14, Tina looked irritated. "Only risotto left," she said flatly. "We're out of chicken." Naomi glanced across the aisle. The man in the tailored suit, the same one Tina had greeted so warmly, was being served chicken Alfredo at that very moment. "That's fine," Naomi said, her voice steady. "Risotto will do." As Tina passed her the tray, her elbow knocked Naomi's cup. Water splashed across Naomi's notebook, darkening the ink on the open page. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Tina muttered. She handed Naomi a single thin napkin, barely glancing at her. "It'll dry." Then she moved on. Eli's hands clenched into fists. "That's enough. She can't treat you like that." Naomi looked down at the smeared ink bleeding through the paper. Observe without judgment. The words were blurred now, unreadable. She closed the journal slowly. "Some storms," she said quietly, "are better recorded than resisted." Eli frowned, unsure what she meant, but he could feel something in her tone and authority he couldn't quite name. Tina continued her service, laughing with the man in the suit again, leaning closer than professionalism required. Amber passed silently behind, gathering empty trays, her movements mechanical. Naomi rested her hands in her lap, feeling the faint tremor of the engines beneath her palms. The humiliation didn't burn, it chilled. It wasn't new, and that was the saddest part. She looked out through the small window. Sunlight caught the curve of the wing, turning it silver against the deep blue sky. She whispered under her breath, words no one could hear. "You can't fix what you don't see." She picked up her pen once more, writing a final note before closing the book. Test of culture ongoing, patience required, observation continues. When the lights dimmed for rest, Naomi leaned back and closed her eyes. The engines hummed like a heartbeat, steady and indifferent. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she began to plan. Not vengeance, something deeper. A reckoning built not from anger but from principle. In seat 14A, the quiet woman everyone ignored was already rewriting the next chapter of Horizon Air. Clouds rolled past like pale mountains, their peaks glowing under the noon sun. From seat 14A, Naomi Carter watched the horizon stretch endlessly, a soft line between blue and white. For a moment, she let herself breathe. The engines hummed, steady as a lullaby. Eli Sanders dozed beside her, arms folded, mouth half open, the corner of his travel magazine slipping from his lap. Naomi smiled faintly, tucking the magazine onto his tray table. Around them, the cabin had settled into that quiet stillness that comes after a meal, the uneasy peace of strangers trapped together in a metal tube miles above the earth. But inside Naomi's mind, calm was only surface deep. Beneath it stirred disappointment, old wounds she thought time had buried. When she founded Horizon Air, she'd made a promise every flight will feel like dignity in motion. She used to say it in every staff orientation, back when she still knew every crew member by name. Yet somewhere, as the company grew, that vision had begun to thin, replaced by rules, checklists, and indifference. Tina Collins was not the disease. She was the symptom. Naomi traced her fingers along the condensation still drying on her sleeve from the earlier incident. It wasn't about water or ice. It was about something colder, the quiet belief that some passengers mattered more than others. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Ma'am, would you like a blanket?" Naomi looked up. Amber Lee stood there, holding one neatly folded. Her eyes darted toward the galley as if afraid to be seen. "That's kind of you, Amber," Naomi said gently, "but I'm fine. Thank you for asking." Amber hesitated, then whispered, "I'm sorry, but before. Tina, She stopped herself, glancing around nervously. Naomi shook her head. "You don't have to apologize for someone else's choices. Just remember how it feels to be unseen." "Use that." Amber's throat tightened. "Yes, ma'am." She tucked the blanket back onto the cart and walked away, her movements lighter now, though her eyes still carried worry. Naomi leaned back, thinking of the woman's words. Fear was contagious, but so was courage. The intercom chimed, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're at cruising altitude, and the weather ahead looks smooth. Sit back and enjoy the flight." The pilot's voice was steady, but Naomi heard the detachment in it. He was the kind who lived by the numbers fuel flow. Altitude. Schedule, not by the faces behind the seat rows. She respected skill, but empathy made a flight safer than any autopilot. She took her phone from her bag and opened the memo app, jotting a few words. Leadership training must include empathy drills. Situational awareness beyond instruments. Her gaze drifted again to the clouds. They reminded her the first time she'd ever flown age 12, scholarship trip to Washington, D.C. She'd worn her Sunday dress and held her mother's hand so tightly the knuckles turned white. When the flight attendant brought her a cookie shaped like an airplane, she'd felt seen, special, like she belonged. Now, sitting here decades later, she wondered how many little girls boarded these planes only to learn they didn't. She sighed quietly. "We can build aircraft strong enough to fly through storms," she thought, "but not hearts strong enough to withstand cruelty." From the galley came laughter, sharp, dismissive. Tina's voice. Naomi turned her head slightly. Tina leaned against the counter, whispering with another attendant from the back section. "Did you see her face when I gave her the cup?" Tina chuckled. She looked like she wanted to file a complaint to heaven itself. Her companion laughed weakly, trying to keep up. Amber passed by them, carrying a tray of snacks. She froze mid-step, then pretended to check the supply drawer, pretending she hadn't heard, but Naomi could tell she had. Eli stirred beside her, blinking awake. "Did I miss anything? Just turbulence of another kind." Naomi replied. Eli frowned. "You let her talk to you that way and still keep calm. You've got the patience of a saint." Naomi smiled softly. "Not a saint. Just someone who's learned that storms end faster when you don't shout at the rain." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You sure got away with words, Miss Carter." Her eyes glinted. "So I've been told." The seatbelt light blinked on again as the aircraft dipped gently. A few passengers gasped, clutching armrests. The turbulence wasn't bad, just enough to remind everyone that control was an illusion. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats," Tina's voice said over the intercom, a hint of irritation slipping through her polished tone. "We'll be resuming service shortly." Naomi noticed how her voice lacked the soothing rhythm that could calm nervous travelers. It wasn't what she said, it was what she didn't feel. The shaking eased, the hum returned to normal. Naomi reached for her notebook again. Her handwriting, small but deliberate, filled a page observation empathy deficit detected at multiple layers: attendant, leadership, culture, hypothesis, fear, or fatigue eroding service values. Test ongoing. She paused before the last line, tapping the pen against her lip. Then she added personal. Try not to lose faith in what you built. The lights dimmed as the sun began to set beyond the left wing. The horizon blazed in streaks of amber and violet, a canvas of calm that belied the tension simmering inside the cabin. Amber returned one last time to check seat belts. As she leaned near Naomi's row, she whispered under her breath, "I'll tell her I'm checking on supplies, but if you need anything, I'll be here." Naomi nodded, touched by the flicker of loyalty. "Thank you, Amber, you're doing fine." When the young woman walked away, Naomi watched her with quiet pride. Somewhere inside that timid frame, a seed of integrity had begun to sprout. The captain announced the beginning of descent preparation, though they still had 2 hours left. The route was clear, but Naomi sensed something heavier approaching, a different kind of turbulence. Tina, back in the galley, spoke to the crew on intercom, unaware that her words carried through the cabin speakers for a few seconds before the channel switched. People like that always think they deserve special treatment. Next time I'll make sure she learns what coach really means. A hush rippled through nearby passengers. Eli turned sharply toward Naomi. Did you hear that Naomi's face remained calm, but her voice lowered to a whisper? Yes. And so did the captain. The slip had lasted only moments, but it was enough. Captain Shaw would have heard it from the cockpit intercom feed. Whether he acted was another test entirely. The plane steadied. The tension lingered, unspoken but palpable. Naomi closed her notebook, pressing the pen inside the spine like sealing evidence. The truth always finds its way to the right ears, she thought. Sometimes you just have to let gravity do the work. As the lights dimmed further for in-flight rest, she adjusted her seat slightly, eyes on the aisle where Tina's shadow moved back and forth. There was no anger left in her only purpose. The calm that blanketed the cabin was deceptive. Everyone believed the worst moments of the flight had passed. But for Naomi Carter, the real test of Horizon Air was just beginning. By the 3rd hour of the flight, the air in the cabin had grown heavy, thick with the stale scent of reheated meals and quiet resentment. The cabin lights had dimmed to a soft gold, the kind meant to lull passengers into uneasy naps. Yet Naomi Carter remained awake, her mind sharp beneath her calm expression. She glanced across the aisle at the suited man Tina had fawned over earlier. He now slept comfortably, his half-empty wine glass balanced on his tray table. 2 rows ahead, the young mother still rocked her baby, humming a lullaby so faint it blended with the drone of the engines. Naomi's gaze softened. The baby had finally drifted into sleep. But moments later, Tina emerged again from the galley, her heels tapping a warning across the floor. "Ma'am," Tina said curtly, "you can't stand there. You're blocking the exit row." The mother startled. "Oh, I'm sorry. I just didn't want him to cry. The aisle is not a daycare." "Please sit down," Tina replied coldly, but the sign isn't on. Tina raised a hand, her patience snapping. "Don't argue with me. I'll have the captain issue a passenger warning if this continues." The woman's lips trembled. She sat quickly, clutching the now wailing baby to her chest. Naomi felt a tightness bloom in her chest. The quiet injustice clawed at her composure. She'd seen prejudice wear many masks, corporate, social, systemic, but cruelty wrapped in a uniform always struck the deepest. Amber lingered a few feet away, torn between duty and conscience. Naomi caught her eye, giving a small, steady nod permission, or perhaps courage. Amber took a hesitant step forward. "Tina, maybe we can let her walk a bit. It helps calm the baby." Tina turned on her with a glare. "Are you questioning my authority now?" Amber's voice shrank to a whisper. "No. Then do your job and stop interrupting mine." Tina snapped. The young attendant's face flushed crimson as she retreated toward the galley. Eli leaned over, muttering under his breath, "That woman's got ice in her veins." Naomi's voice was barely a whisper. "Not ice. Fear. People like her only feel powerful when they make someone else small." She reached into her bag, slid her phone beneath the edge of her scarf, and tapped the record button. The screen glowed faintly before disappearing under the fabric. For the next 20 minutes, she let the scene play out like a silent test. Tina's voice drifted through the aisle again and again, scolding, dismissive, sharp as a slap. Every word became evidence. Naomi knew she wasn't just documenting one flight. She was capturing a symptom of something much larger, the slow erosion of humanity beneath the weight of routine. When Tina returned to check the cabin, Naomi waited. She raised her hand politely. "Excuse me," she said softly. Tina's shoulders stiffened. "What now? That mother up there seems to be struggling. Perhaps someone could help her just for a few minutes." The attendant's eyes narrowed. "We're not babysitters, ma'am. Everyone has problems. Keep to your seat." Her tone dripped with irritation. Naomi met her gaze evenly. "Kindness isn't a service line item, Ms. Collins. It's a choice." Tina's jaw tightened. "Don't lecture me about my job. I'm not," Naomi said quietly. "I'm observing how you do it." The words, calm but deliberate, seemed to throw Tina off balance. Her lips pressed into a thin line before she stormed back to the galley. Eli exhaled slowly. "You sure know how to keep your cool, ma'am. I don't think I could have done that." Naomi smiled faintly. "Anger burns quick. Change takes patience." A few minutes passed in silence. Then, through the cabin speakers, came a faint metallic click, an open mic. Tina's voice slipped through accidentally, dripping disdain. "Some people think they're better than they are. Probably used her last $50 for that ticket." Several passengers looked up, startled. The words cut through the still air like static. The mic snapped off, but the damage was done. Whispers rippled through the rows. Naomi remained perfectly still, her phone still recording. She turned to Eli, speaking just loud enough for him to hear. Sometimes the truth reveals itself. Eli's brows furrowed. You think the captain heard that? I hope he did. In the cockpit, Captain Douglas Shaw indeed had. His jaw clenched as he recognized Tina's voice. He'd flown with her before, sharp, efficient, and occasionally reckless. He knew what he'd heard could spark a passenger complaint, maybe even a reprimand. But he told himself it wasn't his battle. His duty was to fly, not to mediate attitude. That choice to stay silent would haunt him later. Back in the cabin, Naomi folded her scarf neatly over her lap, ending the recording. Her eyes followed Amber, who now knelt beside the mother and handed her a small cup of water. "You're doing great," she whispered. Naomi felt a swell of quiet pride, a spark of decency, fragile but alive. Hours passed. The hum of the engines turned rhythmic, hypnotic. Most passengers had drifted into sleep. The overhead lights glowed dimly, painting the cabin in muted amber. Naomi's eyes stayed open. She was thinking about policy, about accountability, about how easy it was for a culture to rot from the inside while the surface still looked polished. She pulled her small notebook closer and wrote, "Leadership gap identified. Tone starts from top. Compassion requires example." When she looked up again, Tina stood only a few feet away, watching her with folded arms. "You write a lot?" Tina said coolly. "Something you want to share with the class?" Naomi didn't flinch. "Just reflections? About what people?" Tina scoffed. "You must be real bored. Maybe next time spend the extra cash and fly business if you want attention." Naomi's expression didn't change. "Attention isn't what I'm after." The calmness in her tone unsettled Tina more than any argument could have. She turned sharply and stalked back toward the front. Eli let out a low whistle. "You've got steel in you, Miss Carter. That one's gonna snap sooner or later." Naomi's reply was almost a whisper. "Not if she breaks something first." Outside the window, night had settled fully. The plane glided through darkness, the stars like scattered salt against velvet. Naomi pressed her palm lightly against the cold glass. She thought of her late husband, Marcus, how he used to say that flying wasn't about escaping the earth, but learning to see it from above. Perspective, he'd call it. The higher you go, the smaller cruelty looks, but it's still there. She blinked back the sting in her eyes. "You'd hate this, Marcus," she murmured under her breath, "but you'd tell me not to quit." The seatbelt sign flicked on again. A light tremor shook the cabin. Tina's voice returned, overly chipper. "Please fasten your seatbelts as we experience a bit of turbulence." The plane dipped slightly, eliciting gasps. Naomi steadied her breath, her mind already calculating not safety, but consequence. Every cruel remark, every careless action, every silence from the cockpit, they all formed the foundation of a lesson she intended to deliver herself. When the shaking stopped, the cabin eased into uneasy calm once more. Eli rubbed his neck, glancing sideways. "You okay?" Naomi smiled gently. "Better than most, I think." He studied her face. "You're not just some regular passenger, are you?" Naomi met his gaze but didn't answer. She only said, "You'll understand when we land." Her voice was soft but certain. like the promise of a storm that hadn't yet arrived. The hum of the aircraft filled the cabin like a heartbeat. Outside, the world was darkness, endless and silent. Inside, the lights glowed low and warm, giving the illusion of calm. But Naomi Carter could feel the tension pulsing beneath it, quiet but alive, like a storm crouching behind the clouds. She sat motionless, hands resting lightly on her lap, her scarf covering the phone still recording beside her. For over an hour, she had captured voices, snide remarks, laughter from the galley, even a careless confession from Tina about dealing with difficult passengers. Each word was a thread in the tapestry of arrogance Naomi had come to expose. From across the aisle, Eli Sanders watched her with curiosity. He sensed that something was shifting, though he didn't yet understand what. She was too calm for a woman so insulted, too measured in her silence. There was purpose in the stillness. A soft chime announced the beginning of cabin checks before descent. Amber appeared, moving carefully between the rows, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. When she reached Naomi's row, she leaned in slightly. "Everything all right, ma'am?" she whispered. "Yes," Naomi replied, her voice gentle. "How are you holding up?" Amber hesitated. "It's hard sometimes. You try to do good work, but when the person above you sets the wrong tone, it changes everything." Naomi studied her face. "You know what the hardest part of leadership is?" Amber shook her head, realizing that silence makes you part of the problem, but the moment you speak up, you risk losing everything. That's why courage is rarer than skill. Amber blinked, her lips parting slightly. She looked as if she might say something, but before she could, Tina's voice sliced through the cabin. "Amber, why are you lingering? Move it. We're collecting trays." Amber straightened immediately. "Yes, ma'am." She flashed Naomi an apologetic glance and hurried away. Eli frowned. She shouldn't have to take that. "No," Naomi murmured, "but she's learning that she doesn't have to." She picked up her pen and jotted one final note before closing her notebook completely. Documentation complete. Intervention after landing. The engines hummed deeper as the aircraft began its gradual descent toward Seattle. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've started our approach into SeaTac International Airport. Please fasten your seatbelts and make sure your seat backs are upright." Naomi's pulse remained steady. She had traveled thousands of miles in her lifetime, but none had felt like this. Tonight, she wasn't flying through air, she was flying through truth. Tina moved briskly down the aisle, collecting trash with mechanical precision. When she reached Naomi's row, she extended the plastic bag without looking at her. Naomi dropped her napkin in quietly. "Thank you." Tina didn't respond. She turned to Eli instead. "Sir, anything to discard?" Eli shook his head. "No, but you might want to check your tone." Tina froze, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Eli said, his voice firm but controlled. "You've been disrespectful to this lady since we boarded. That's not service, it's bullying." Tina's cheeks flushed. "Sir, I don't appreciate." Naomi's hand rose slightly, calm but commanding. "Mr. Sanders, it's all right." Eli looked at her, confused. "But it's all right," she repeated softly. "The time to speak will come." The authority in her tone silenced them both. Tina turned on her heel and marched toward the front galley, muttering something under her breath. As the plane dipped lower through the clouds, Naomi felt the change in cabin pressure, the soft pop in her ears. She gazed out the window. The city lights below shimmered like a sea of gold, scattered across the darkness. It was beautiful, and it reminded her of why she had built Horizon in the first place. Flying wasn't supposed to feel like survival, it was supposed to feel like possibility. The wheels touched down with a soft thud. Applause rippled faintly from the rear rows, a habit some passengers never abandoned. The engines roared in reverse, then settled as the plane slowed to taxi speed. Naomi didn't move. She watched Tina and Amber at the front, preparing to open the doors, their faces suddenly bright with practiced smiles. Performances resumed now that the curtain of landing had fallen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tina announced, her voice syrupy sweet. "Welcome to Seattle. We hope you enjoyed your flight with Horizon Air." Eli chuckled under his breath. She's acting like nothing happened. Naomi's gaze was steady. Masks always come back on when the lights are on, when the seatbelt sign blinked off. The familiar chaos began, people standing too early, bags tugged from bins, phones snapping awake. Naomi remained seated, hands folded, waiting for the aisle to clear. Tina and Amber stood at the exit, repeating their well-rehearsed chorus, "Thank you for flying with us." When Naomi reached them, she paused. Tina's eyes met hers, smug and victorious. "Have a good night," Tina said, the words clipped. Naomi smiled faintly. "Oh, I intend to." Then she turned to Amber. "You've done your job well tonight. Remember that?" Amber's eyes widened slightly. "Thank you, ma'am." Naomi stepped aside, allowing the remaining passengers to disembark. Eli waited at the aisle's end. "You're not getting off?" he asked quietly. "Not yet," she said. "There's one more conversation I need to have." The look in her eyes stopped him from asking further. He nodded slowly. "Whatever it is, I'm guessing it's going to be important." "It is," Naomi replied, "and overdue." Once the last passenger exited, she pressed the call button above her seat. The soft ding echoed through the quiet cabin. Amber appeared first, startled to see Naomi still there. "Oh, are you okay?" "Ma'am, we're finished boarding out." Naomi's tone was calm, but there was no mistaking the authority in it. "Please inform Ms. Collins, Captain Shaw, and your purser that I would like a word. Here, before they disembark." Amber blinked. "Ma'am, we're not really supposed to tell them passenger 14A insists," Naomi said evenly. "It's important." Something in her voice, a mix of calm certainty and command, made Amber hesitate only a second before she nodded. "All right, I'll tell them." Naomi watched her hurry down the aisle, whispering urgently to Tina and the others near the galley. From her seat, she heard fragments. "She wants the captain. Says she insists." Tina's voice hissed, sharp and incredulous. "What, absolutely not? Tell her to file a complaint online like everyone else." She said, "Passenger 14A insists." Amber repeated, her voice small. Tina groaned. "Fine, I'll handle it." Moments later, the captain himself appeared at the curtain dividing first class from economy. His expression was polite but weary. "What seems to be the issue?" "Ma'am, we're in turnaround prep." Naomi rose from her seat, smoothing the front of her sweater. The faint stain from earlier still marked her sleeve. A silent witness. "My issue," she said calmly, "is with this flight, your crew, and the culture that allowed it to unfold." The captain blinked. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but that's a matter for customer service." Naomi's voice didn't rise, but it filled the cabin nonetheless. "No, this is a matter for command. The captain frowned. "And who exactly do you think you're addressing?" Naomi's eyes met his, steady as steel. "You'll know soon enough. But before we leave this aircraft, everyone involved will understand exactly what kind of flight this has been." Her tone was even, but the promise in her words carried weight. It was not anger, it was authority quietly waking from disguise. Eli, still standing a few rows back, watched her with a mixture of awe and curiosity. He didn't know who she truly was, but in that moment, he felt certain of one thing: the storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. The air inside the aircraft had shifted. The cheerful pretense of landing had faded, leaving behind a taut, uncertain silence. Dr. Naomi Carter stood calmly at row 14, while the rest of the crew exchanged uneasy glances. Her presence, still quiet, still poised, had begun to command the kind of authority that didn't need raising its voice. Captain Douglas Shaw cleared his throat, forcing a professional smile. "Ma'am, if there's been any inconvenience during your flight, I assure you our team will report it properly. But we do need to prepare the aircraft for its next leg." Naomi met his gaze evenly. "This flight isn't going anywhere until we finish our discussion." He frowned. "I'm afraid that's not your decision." "That's where you're mistaken," she replied, reaching into her bag. She drew out a slim identification card encased in glass and held it toward him. The golden Horizon Air insignia glimmered under the cabin lights. Below it, her full name was etched clearly: Dr. Naomi L. Carter, Chief Executive Officer. The captain froze. His jaw slackened as recognition struck. "Dr. Carter." A stunned silence filled the cabin. Tina's confident smirk evaporated. Amber gasped softly, her eyes darting between her superior and the woman she had unknowingly served. Naomi's tone remained level. "I boarded this flight anonymously to observe service standards after receiving multiple passenger complaints about bias and misconduct. What I witnessed today was not merely poor service. It was a breach of everything Horizon stands for." Tina's face went pale. "You're the CEO." Naomi nodded once. "Yes, and I intend to ensure that every person who steps onto one of my planes feels respected, regardless of what seat they occupy or what they look like." The captain swallowed hard. "Dr. Carter." If I had known Naomi lifted a hand gently, "That's exactly the point. Captain Shaw, respect should never depend on who someone is." The weight of her words settled over the cabin like thunder after lightning. Amber stood frozen at the galley door, torn between relief and dread. Tina, usually sharp and commanding, now looked like a child caught lying. Naomi gestured toward the rows of empty seats. "Please, sit, all of you." When they hesitated, she added, "This is still a debrief. You're on duty until I release you." The crew obeyed. The captain and Tina sat stiffly in the front row, Amber a few seats behind them, hands clasped nervously. Eli lingered by the exit, unsure whether to leave. Naomi glanced toward him. "Mr. Sanders, you may stay if you'd like. You've witnessed enough to deserve the truth." Eli nodded. "I think I'll stay." Naomi set her notebook on the armrest beside her, flipping it open. The neat rows of writing seemed endless times. Observations, phrases. Then, with deliberate calm, she pressed play on her phone. The cabin filled with familiar voices. Tina's voice, dismissive and cutting, replayed word for word. People like that always think they deserve special treatment. Each syllable echoed painfully in the silence. Tina's shoulders curled inward, Her eyes darted toward the captain, who avoided her gaze. Naomi stopped the recording. This is your team's voice, the sound passengers hear when they're most vulnerable. And it's not the voice of compassion, it's contempt. Tina found her voice, though it trembled. Dr. Carter, I didn't mean anything by it. I was stressed. It was a long flight, and that passenger was difficult. Naomi's tone didn't waver. You mean the mother with the crying baby, or the woman who simply asked for water without ice, which of them deserved ridicule? Tina stammered. It was a misunderstanding. It wasn't. Naomi interrupted gently. It was a reflection of who you've allowed yourself to become. The captain exhaled slowly, the shame rising in his expression. Dr. Carter, I should have stepped in when I heard that over the intercom. Yes, she said softly. You should have. For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound. Naomi closed the notebook. This isn't about one flight attendant or one captain. It's about a culture. Horizon Air was built on dignity. I've seen it lost piece by piece through arrogance, exhaustion, and apathy. But it ends here. Amber's voice broke the silence. Dr. Carter. Naomi turned toward her. Yes, Ms. Lee. Amber swallowed hard. I wanted to help. I tried, but I was afraid. Naomi's expression softened. You showed courage when you offered kindness, even when it wasn't safe to. Remember that fear doesn't disqualify bravery. It defines it. Amber's eyes glistened. Thank you. Naomi turned back to the others. You will all receive official notices for this flight. HR will conduct follow-up evaluations within 48 hours. Tina Collins, you are suspended effective immediately pending review. Tina's face blanched. Suspended. I've worked here 15 years. Then you've had 15 years to know better, Naomi said, her voice steady but not cruel. Experience doesn't excuse behavior, it amplifies its impact. The woman sank back into her seat, silent. Naomi looked at the captain next. And you, Captain Shaw, will attend leadership retraining. Horizon needs pilots who command with integrity, not convenience. He nodded solemnly. Understood. Finally, Naomi turned toward Amber. You will be temporarily reassigned to our mentorship program. I want you to train under one of our senior service coaches. You have potential. Don't lose it. Amber's breath hitched. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Eli, still by the door, broke the heavy quiet. Dr. Carter, if I may say you handled that with more grace than most generals I've served under. Naomi smiled faintly. Grace is just discipline wrapped in patience. Mr. Sanders. The captain rose. Dr. Carter, I'll make sure the flight report reflects everything accurately. See that it does, Naomi replied. Integrity starts with documentation. As the crew dispersed, some stunned, some subdued, Amber lingered. Dr. Carter, she said softly. I don't think I'll ever forget this. Naomi looked at her warmly. Good, because the only thing more powerful than witnessing injustice is refusing to repeat it. When the others left, only Naomi and Eli remained in the dim cabin. The terminal lights glowed faintly through the windows, painting long reflections on the floor. Eli exhaled. You didn't just fire them, you changed them. Maybe, Naomi said thoughtfully, but change isn't an order, it's an opportunity. What they do with it is up to them. She picked up her bag and straightened her scarf. I have a board meeting in the morning. They'll want answers about culture metrics. For once, I'll have real evidence instead of excuses." Eli chuckled softly. "Guess they picked the wrong passenger to mess with." Naomi smiled. "They picked the right one to remind them who we serve." As she stepped off the plane into the quiet terminal of Gate C-27, the smell of jet fuel and rain greeted her. For a fleeting second, she paused, looking back at the empty aisle she had just left behind. Then she whispered to herself, "Next time, they'll remember the sky belongs to everyone." The morning light spilled across Seattle's downtown skyline, casting the glass towers in soft gold. Inside Horizon Air's headquarters, the executive floor buzzed quietly, a rhythm of footsteps, coffee machines, and cautious whispers. Word of the incident from Flight HA-204 had already started to spread. In her office, overlooking the bay, Dr. Naomi Carter sat behind a simple oak desk. The same calm that carried her through the flight now wrapped around her like armor. Her scarf, the one stained from the spilled water, hung neatly on the coat stand behind her. She hadn't washed it. It was a reminder. The soft knock on the door came precisely at 9. Her assistant peeked in. "Dr. Carter, the operations team is here for your debrief." "Thank you. Maya, send them in." Moments later, 4 executives entered: the COO, the HR director, the head of flight operations, and the PR chief. They moved cautiously, aware that today's meeting would decide more than internal policy. Naomi greeted them with a polite nod. "Please, sit." Once they settled, she folded her hands. "You've all read my report." "I assume, yes," said Mark Holloway, the COO, "and we're aware it's serious, but before we move to disciplinary actions, may I ask, did the media get wind of it?" Naomi's eyes lifted slowly. "I didn't conduct this inspection to protect headlines. Mark, I did it to protect values." He shifted in his chair. "Of course, but still our image. Naomi interrupted softly, "is a reflection of what happens behind the curtain. What I witnessed wasn't an isolated lapse. It was a mirror of a deeper fracture in our culture." A hush followed. The HR director, a woman named Helen Ruiz, spoke next. "The recording is undeniable. We've suspended Ms. Collins and initiated formal review. We're also reaching out to the passengers affected." "Good," Naomi said, "but suspension isn't resolution. It's pause. I want corrective programs, not just punishment. The goal isn't to humiliate, it's to heal." Helen nodded, visibly relieved by the tone. "Understood. I can draft a cultural audit proposal by next week." Naomi leaned back slightly. "Not next week. Tomorrow, and make sure every crew member from trainee to captain participates. We'll call it Project Elevate. The focus dignity in the skies." The PR chief scribbled notes furiously. "Dr. Carter, would you like to issue a statement? We could frame it as a leadership initiative. CEO takes a flight to test service firsthand. It could humanize the brand." Naomi gave a faint, knowing smile. "If we have to humanize the brand, it means we've forgotten it's built by humans." Her words silenced the room again. Outside, gulls circled above the bay. Naomi turned slightly toward the window. Her reflection looked back at her steady, older, wiser, but tired. She wondered how many leaders had sat in rooms like this, claiming to value respect while turning a blind eye to what it meant. She turned back. Captain Shaw Helen opened her folder. "He's agreed to attend the retraining program, along with mentoring new recruits about leadership accountability." "Good," Naomi said. His silence mid-flight was as loud as Tina's cruelty. I want him to understand that indifference is complicity." Mark cleared his throat, and the young attendant Amber Lee Naomi's expression softened. "Keep her. She's the kind of person we need scared, but with heart. Fear can be trained out of someone. Arrogance cannot." Helen smiled faintly. "I'll make sure she's placed under one of our senior service coaches." The meeting stretched another half-hour. Policies, press drafts, procedural changes. But Naomi's thoughts wandered often, drifting back to that plane cabin, the crying baby. Eli's quiet anger, Amber's trembling hands, each image reminded her how fragile dignity could be. When the team finally left, Naomi remained by the window. The reflection of clouds drifted across the glass. She whispered to herself, "We build planes to survive storms, but maybe we were meant to build people instead." Her intercom buzzed. "Dr. Carter, Mr. Sanders is here to see you," said Maya. Naomi smiled. "Please, send him in." Eli stepped through the door, his stride still steady, though a little hesitant now that he stood in a world of suits and strategy. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Ma'am, never," Naomi said warmly. "You kept your promise. Come in." He looked around the office, taking in the awards, the aviation photos, the model of Horizon's first plane. "So, this is where the storm landed." "Huh," Naomi chuckled. "Something like that." He sat across from her. "I just wanted to say, thank you. What you did on that plane, it reminded me of what leadership's supposed to look like. You didn't just call her out. You showed everyone watching that there's another way to fight." Naomi's gaze softened. "Thank you, Eli. But I didn't fight her. I held up a mirror. She fought herself." He nodded slowly. "Still, it mattered. You made people see." She smiled, then motioned toward the coat stand. "See that scarf?" Eli followed her gaze. "The one with the stain?" "Yes, I'll never wash it. Every time I see it, I'll remember that even small indignities can leave marks. But they can also remind us to be better." He leaned back. "You're something else, Dr. Carter. Just human," she said simply, "trying to build an airline that remembers that word." A pause passed between them, filled only by the hum of the city outside. Then Eli cleared his throat. "If you ever need someone to teach your crews a bit of patience, maybe throw in a few Navy stories. I'm free these days." Naomi's laughter rang softly. "You might regret offering that, Mr. Sanders. We could use a few good men who know how to speak with calm under fire." He smiled. "Then I'll take the job. Ma'am, no pay needed, just a seat that reclines properly." She extended her hand. "Deal." As he left, Naomi watched him disappear into the hallway, his silhouette framed by the morning light. Something inside her felt lighter. Later that afternoon, she drafted a short internal memo addressed to all Horizon Air employees. It read, "Respect doesn't cost a cent, but its absence bankrupts trust. Every passenger who boards our planes carries a story we can't see. Our job isn't just to fly them safely, it's to remind them they matter. Dr. Naomi L. Carter." When she hit send, she sat back in her chair, exhaling slowly. For the first time in months, she felt the pulse of the company again, not in profits or projections, but in purpose. Outside, a plane climbed into the sky, leaving a white trail across the blue. Naomi watched until it vanished into light, a faint smile touching her lips. Some storms end not with thunder, but with understanding. The rain drummed softly against the glass windows of Horizon's training center 2 weeks later. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and new carpet. Rows of uniforms hung neatly on racks, their navy blue pressed and spotless, as though untouched by human error. Inside Classroom 3, Tina Collins sat alone at the back, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the floor. Her suspension had been the talk of the staff lounges and social media groups. Some pitied her. Others said she had it coming. But Tina didn't care about the gossip. What stung most wasn't the punishment, it was that she had been seen, exposed. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Helen Ruiz entered, tablet in hand, her tone professional yet not unkind. "Miss Collins, thank you for coming in today." Tina rose slightly. "I didn't have much choice." "Did I?" Helen gave a thin smile. "Perhaps not, but choice is what today's about. You'll have one before this program ends." Tina crossed her arms. "If this is another lecture about empathy, I've heard it all before." Helen regarded her quietly. "I doubt you've felt it before." Before Tina could respond, another voice came from the doorway, warm, calm, and unmistakably firm. "May I join you?" Helen, both women turned. Dr. Naomi Carter stepped into the room, wearing a charcoal gray suit and that same unwashed scarf, faintly stained but proudly visible. Tina froze. "Dr. Carter, I didn't know you'd be here. I make it a point to visit when the lesson matters," Naomi said gently. She motioned for Tina to sit. "Please, let's talk." Helen quietly excused herself, leaving the two women alone. Naomi walked to the window, watching planes taxi under the drizzle. "You know, the first time I worked on a flight crew, I was 19, she began softly. "I was terrified I'd spill coffee on someone or forget to smile at the wrong moment. But what I remember most wasn't the fear, it was the joy of helping people feel safe at 30,000 feet." Tina stared at her hands. Things change. People change. True. Naomi agreed. But purpose doesn't have to. Tina swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just got tired of being disrespected by passengers. They talk down to you, treat you like you're invisible." Naomi nodded slowly. "So you decided to make someone else feel that same invisibility." The words hit like turbulence. Tina looked away. "I guess I stopped seeing people. It became routine." "That's how cruelty starts," Naomi said softly. "Not with hate, but with habit." Tina's shoulders slumped. "When you called me out on that plane, I felt humiliated." Naomi's voice remained calm. "It wasn't humiliation I wanted you to feel. It was awareness." Tina looked up, eyes glistening. "You could have ruined me publicly. Why didn't you?" Naomi smiled faintly. "Because I don't believe in destroying people. I believe in restoring them if they're willing." For a long time, Tina said nothing. The steady rhythm of rain filled the silence. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know if I deserve that chance." "Deserve is a fragile word," Naomi replied. "You can't earn it by pretending, and you can't lose it by failing once. What matters is whether you want to rebuild." Something in Tina's expression softened, the walls around her pride cracking for the first time in years. Naomi stepped closer. "There's a training session next week, new recruits. I want you there. Not as an instructor, not yet, but as an observer. Watch what service looks like when it comes from care, not control." Tina hesitated. "You really think I can change?" "I think anyone can," Naomi said, her eyes kind, "but only if they start listening again." When Naomi left the room, Tina remained by the window. Outside, A plane lifted into the gray sky, slicing through the drizzle like forgiveness breaking through shame. Across the complex, Amber Lee sat nervously in a different classroom. Beside her stood Eli Sanders, now wearing a Horizon visitor badge and his old Navy jacket. He addressed the group of trainees with quiet authority. "You'll meet all kinds of people up there," Eli said, gesturing toward the ceiling as if pointing to the sky itself. "Some will be kind, some won't. But your job isn't to judge them, it's to remember they trusted you enough to sit in your care." Amber watched him closely, admiration shining in her eyes. He turned to her suddenly. "Miss Lee here saw something wrong on that flight and still tried to do right. That's the kind of backbone we need in this company. Not the loudest, not the toughest, the steady ones." Amber blushed. "I just did what anyone should." Eli smiled. "Exactly. That's what makes it rare." Naomi arrived quietly at the back of the room, unnoticed at first. She watched the exchange with a subtle smile. There it was, growth. The seed she'd planted on that flight was already sprouting roots. When the session ended, she approached Eli and Amber. "That was excellent," Naomi said warmly. "You're both exactly where you're meant to be." Eli tipped his head. "Just paying it forward, ma'am." "That flight gave me purpose again." Amber nodded shyly. "I've learned more in 1 week here than in my whole first year flying." Naomi looked at them both. "Keep learning, keep questioning, and when you're tired, remember leadership isn't about power, it's about presence." Amber smiled softly. "That's what you showed us." Naomi placed a hand on her shoulder. Then it wasn't for nothing. That evening, Naomi walked alone through the empty hangar. The metallic echo of her footsteps mixed with the low hum of distant turbines. She paused beneath the massive wing of a parked jet, its silver surface gleaming under fluorescent light. She reached out and touched the cold metal. "You carried me through a storm," she murmured. Her phone buzzed a message from Helen Update Collins attended full session. Stayed the entire time. No incident. Requested to assist in next week's volunteer service flight. Naomi smiled faintly. Progress, she thought. Not perfection, but progress. She typed a brief reply. Approve it. Everyone deserves a sky to rise again. Pocketing her phone, she looked up once more at the vast aircraft towering above her. The reflection of the hangar lights shimmered on its wings, spreading like dawn. In that quiet moment, Naomi felt something she hadn't in months, peace. The storm had broken. The sky was clear again. 3 weeks had passed since Project Elevate officially launched, and the Horizon Air Training Center pulsed with new energy. Posters lined the walls, showing the slogan Naomi had written herself, "Respect takes no fuel." But it carries everyone farther. The company cafeteria, once cold and quiet, now buzzed with conversations about empathy workshops and mentorship pairings. For the first time in years, Horizon employees were talking about why they served, not just how. Yet for Tina Collins, the world still felt small. Her suspension had been lifted temporarily under supervision, but her uniform felt heavier now. The navy fabric that once made her feel important now reminded her of every mistake. She stood by the window of the staff lounge, watching the rain-soaked tarmac where jets gleamed like polished mirrors. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mind if I sit?" She turned. It was Amber Lee, holding 2 paper cups. Tina hesitated before nodding. "Sure." Amber offered her one. chamomile. I figured you could use something calm before the volunteer flight." Tina accepted the cup with a faint, wary smile. "So they told you I'd be on it, too." Amber nodded. "Dr. Carter said it was important we fly together. I think she believes we can learn something from each other." Tina huffed softly. "Learn what? How to fall from grace." Amber looked at her carefully, or maybe how to stand up again. That silenced Tina. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain outside blurred the distant lights of a departing jet. The next morning, the volunteer flight gathered at Gate 9A. It was a short route Seattle to Denver, carrying a group of veterans and children with disabilities participating in a charity event. No cameras, no reporters, just service for its purest purpose. Naomi Carter stood discreetly near the boarding area, clipboard in hand. She had chosen not to announce her presence to the passengers. Today wasn't about oversight, it was about observation. She watched as Amber helped a young boy in a wheelchair board the plane, speaking softly to him about his favorite superhero. The child giggled, clutching her hand. Then her eyes found Tina. The older woman stood by the galley door, assisting an elderly veteran with his cane. Her movements were careful, deliberate, and most notably, humble. There was no performance, no trace of the sharp-edged arrogance she once wielded. Naomi made a quiet note in her folder. Change in tone, genuine concern observed. Once everyone was seated. She joined the flight quietly, sitting near the back beside Eli Sanders, who was there as both a volunteer and moral support. He leaned toward her. "Never thought I'd see that woman smile without condescension." Naomi smiled faintly. Maybe she remembered what flying used to mean. In the air, something extraordinary happened. The cabin, once a stage for indifference, was alive with warmth. Amber moved gracefully down the aisle, her laughter contagious. Tina, usually reserved, knelt beside a child who was nervous about takeoff, showing him how to fold paper into a small airplane. Eli watched the scene unfold and murmured, "That's what leadership does. It doesn't bark orders. It changes the air around it." Naomi nodded slowly, her eyes soft. "Exactly. Real reform doesn't come from a policy manual. It comes from a person deciding to care again." Halfway through the flight, turbulence rattled the aircraft. A few passengers gasped. One of the children began to cry. For a brief second, panic flickered in Tina's eyes, but Amber was already at her side. "It's okay," Amber whispered to the child. "You know what the plane's doing, it's dancing with the clouds." The boy's tears paused. "Really?" Amber nodded. "It's just showing off." Tina smiled an honest, warm smile that reached her eyes. "And you're safe, buddy. We've got you." Naomi watched from the back, pride swelling in her chest. That single moment, two women. One learning to forgive herself, and the other learning to trust her voice was worth every sleepless night she'd spent rebuilding Horizon. When the plane landed in Denver, applause filled the cabin. The veterans clapped, the children cheered, and the crew, both old and new, exchanged quiet glances of relief and pride. As the passengers disembarked, Naomi waited near the exit, greeting each one with a simple, "Thank you for flying." When Tina reached her, she stopped. "Dr. Carter, I don't know if I can ever erase what I did, but I think I finally understand why you didn't give up on me." Naomi studied her face, then nodded. "Because I saw the part of you that still wanted to do right. That part was just buried under pride." Tina exhaled shakily. You were right. Kindness isn't weakness, it's discipline. Naomi smiled softly. And it's contagious. Amber approached them, her eyes bright. Dr. Carter. That little boy asked if we could send him another flight tag for his backpack. Said he wants to be a pilot someday. Naomi chuckled. Then I think we've done our job today. Eli, standing nearby, grinned. Seems like the skies are cleaner now. Ma'am? Naomi turned toward him. Cleaner and quieter. He raised a brow. You mean peaceful? No, she said, looking out at the gleaming horizon. Peaceful means still. This feels alive. That evening, back at Horizon headquarters, Naomi sat alone in her office, reviewing the volunteer flight reports. Every note reflected the same pattern: passengers satisfied, crew cohesive, no incidents. But one comment stood out, written in uneven handwriting from a child passenger. The lady with the short hair told me not to be scared of clouds. She said even airplanes need hugs sometimes. Naomi smiled, realizing it was Amber's doing, but the words, perhaps unknowingly, described the entire company. Her phone buzzed. It was an email from Helen Ruiz. Tina Collins formally requested to enroll as a permanent mentor in the empathy program. She says she wants to teach others what I forgot. Approval. Naomi's eyes lingered on the message before typing back, approved. Sometimes the best teachers are those who've fallen and learned how to rise. She sent the email and leaned back in her chair. Outside, the last light of day touched the horizon, painting the clouds in hues of rose and gold. For the first time since that fateful flight, she felt the company's soul returning to its rightful place up there, between humility and hope. The following month, Horizon Air prepared for its biggest test since Project Elevate began a high-profile flight carrying media representatives and investors from Seattle to New York. It wasn't just a trip, it was a statement. After months of introspection and reform, this journey would show the world that Horizon had transformed from a company that once stumbled into disgrace to one that could rise with integrity. Inside the training center, Dr. Naomi Carter reviewed final reports. Every department had been involved, from engineering to catering, from ground crew to pilots. Yet, what mattered most wasn't the numbers, it was the people. She wanted this flight to be more than smooth. She wanted it to breathe with humanity. Her assistant, Maya, knocked gently. Dr. Carter, the media coordination team is waiting for your briefing. Naomi smiled faintly. Give me 10 minutes, please. Maya nodded and left quietly. Naomi turned toward the window. From her office, she could see the runway stretching like a silver ribbon into the misty sky. She thought about all the faces she'd met these past months, faces once hardened by indifference, now learning to soften again. A notification pinged on her tablet, a message from Helen Ruiz. Confirmed crew for Flight HA-6001 lead mentor Tina Collins, cabin lead Amber Lee, volunteer ethics coach Eli Sanders, captain Douglas Shaw. Naomi's smile widened. Full circle, she thought. Let's see how far they've come. The morning of the flight was crisp, sunlight reflecting off the wet tarmac after a light dawn shower. At Gate 18, a sense of calm professionalism filled the air. Tina, now wearing her uniform again, adjusted her scarf in the mirror by the crew lounge. Her reflection stared back, older, humbler, but steadier. Amber appeared behind her. Nervous Tina exhaled, terrified, but not of flying, of failing. Amber shook her head. You won't. Just remember what you told me before our last flight. Every passenger carries a story you don't know." Tina smiled softly. "Looks like my own advice came back around." Nearby, Eli Sanders was briefing the cabin team, his voice calm yet commanding. "Remember, respect isn't a checklist, it's a reflex. You don't wait for someone to earn it, you give it freely." Captain Douglas Shaw, still dignified but changed by humility, nodded to the team. "Let's give them a flight worth remembering for the right reasons this time." Boarding began smoothly. Naomi, as planned, boarded last. Though the investors and journalists didn't recognize her in her simple gray attire, her presence carried quiet authority. She took seat 8A and observed without intrusion. Amber's voice came over the intercom, warm, genuine, practiced. "Welcome aboard Horizon Air Flight 6001, where our mission is simple: to treat every guest as part of our journey. We're honored you're here." The words carried a sincerity that silenced even the chatter of the reporters. It wasn't corporate language, it was human. From her seat, Naomi noticed Tina assisting an elderly passenger struggling to stow his bag. She didn't sigh or roll her eyes this time. Instead, she said gently, "Let me help you with that, sir. You just enjoy your seat today." The man smiled, his gratitude visible in the way he settled down. Naomi made a note in her small leather notebook, transformation complete not from fear, but from grace. At cruising altitude, the cabin glowed with a soft, golden light. Amber moved quietly through the aisles, checking on passengers. Eli, seated near the galley, watched proudly as the crew worked together like a symphony. Then turbulence struck. It wasn't severe, just enough to jolt everyone awake, but a few trays rattled and cups tipped. Naomi steadied herself, glancing around. Across the aisle, a nervous journalist gripped her armrest. Amber crouched beside her immediately. "You're safe," she said softly. "It's just a little pocket of wind saying hello." The journalist laughed nervously, relaxing. Amber's calm presence spread through the cabin like oxygen. Tina gave her a quick nod from the galley, a silent, "well done." Minutes later, the turbulence eased. The intercom clicked. Captain Shaw's voice came through. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be clear of this air pocket shortly. Please enjoy the rest of your flight, and remember, even the skies have moods." Laughter rippled through the cabin. It was subtle, but it worked. The tension broke. When meal service began, Naomi noticed a moment that crystallized everything Horizon had been trying to rebuild. A child traveling with his mother accidentally spilled orange juice across his tray. The mother apologized frantically, clearly embarrassed. Tina hurried over, but instead of frustration, her face softened. "No harm done," she said kindly. "I've made bigger messes with coffee." She knelt, helping them clean up, and then offered the boy a replacement drink. "How about apple juice this time, Captain?" she teased gently. The boy giggled, his fear forgotten, across the cabin. Eli caught Naomi's eye. His nod said everything she's found her way back. As the flight neared New York, Captain Shaw made a surprise announcement. "Before we begin our descent, I'd like to recognize our cabin team. This flight marks the official relaunch of Horizon Air's service program, led by Dr. Naomi Carter. She's on board today, and her leadership brought us all here." Gasps filled the cabin as heads turned toward Naomi. She rose slowly, modest but radiant. "I wasn't planning to make a speech," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly. "But since you've been kind enough to call me out, let me say this. The true strength of a company isn't in its planes or profits. It's in the people who choose, every day, to lead with respect. Today, I saw that spirit return to our skies. Applause filled the cabin, warm and genuine. Tina blinked back tears. Amber grinned. Eli clapped slowly, pride shining through his weathered face. Naomi smiled at them, then sat back, looking out the window as the skyline of New York came into view, towers glinting like promises kept. Amber. Hours later, after the flight, the media headlines told their story. Horizon air soars again, from scandal to standard of compassion. In her quiet office that evening, Naomi read the article and then closed her laptop. The city lights reflected in the window behind her, shimmering like stars. She whispered softly to herself, "This is what healing looks like, not noise, but quiet renewal." Her phone buzzed. A message from Amber. "Thank you for believing in us. Dr. Carter. The skies feel lighter now." Naomi smiled and replied, "It wasn't belief, it was trust. You all carried it home, and for the first time since the storm that started it all, Naomi Carter finally felt what she had fought so hard to restore, peace with purpose." The next few weeks moved swiftly, as if the universe itself wanted to make up for lost time. News of Horizon Air's transformation spread far beyond Seattle. Travel blogs praised the airline's heartfelt humanity, while major networks described it as a comeback written not in press releases, but in compassion. Inside headquarters, Dr. Naomi Carter sat reviewing a report labeled Project Elevate Quarter 1 Summary. The metrics were astounding: passenger satisfaction up 37%, employee turnover down by half, and dozens of unsolicited letters of gratitude from travelers. But what struck her most were the personal stories sprinkled between the data handwritten notes from crew members describing how they'd rediscovered meaning in their work. One from a flight attendant read, after years of faking smiles, "I finally mean them again." Another said, "I learned more in one day of kindness than in a decade of protocol." Naomi's throat tightened slightly. She closed the folder and turned to the window, where a silver jet ascended into the morning sky. Maya, her assistant, entered quietly. "Dr. Carter, the documentary crew from CNN just confirmed they'll be filming next week for the feature segment." Naomi smiled faintly. "Let them film the crew, not me. The story belongs to them." "Of course," Maya replied, then hesitated. "There's something else. Miss, Collins requested to meet you privately. She said it's important." Naomi nodded. "Send her in." Moments later, Tina Collins stepped into the office. She wore her uniform with quiet dignity this time. No trace of ego left. Her hands clutched a slim folder. "Dr. Carter," she began softly, "I know you're busy, but I needed to thank you in person." Naomi gestured for her to sit. "You don't owe me thanks. Tina, you did the work yourself." Tina shook her head. "No. You gave me a chance when no one else would have. That flight changed me. Every day since, I've tried to be someone my younger self would have respected." Naomi's eyes warmed. "That's all I ever wanted, for you to find pride without stepping on others to feel tall." Tina smiled faintly, then handed her the folder. "These are letters from my new trainees. They wrote them after completing the empathy program. I thought you should read them." Naomi opened it and scanned the pages. The first one began, Collins told us mistakes don't define us, what we do after them does. The words struck deep. Naomi looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. You've become the teacher I hoped you'd be. Tina blinked back emotion. I just learned from the best example. A comfortable silence filled the room before Tina rose to leave. But at the door, she turned. Dr. Carter, there's something else you should know. Tomorrow's training session, it's about handling bias on board. Amber Lee asked if you'd come speak. She said it would mean everything to the team. Naomi hesitated only a moment before nodding. Tell her I'll be there. The next afternoon, Training Room 5B buzzed with anticipation. Rows of fresh-faced recruits sat upright, notebooks ready. At the front stood Amber Lee, her presence calm but assured. Behind her, Eli Sanders adjusted the projector and winked at Naomi as she entered quietly. Amber began, her voice clear but warm. Today's topic is the hardest one we face, not turbulence, not emergencies, but our own blind spots. Sometimes prejudice isn't loud. Sometimes it hides behind a smile or a joke. A few heads nodded solemnly. She gestured toward the door. But before we start, I'd like to welcome someone who taught me that silence in the face of wrong isn't neutrality. It's surrender. Please, Dr. Carter. The recruits applauded softly as Naomi stepped forward. She didn't stand behind the podium. Instead, she stood among them, eye level. I want to tell you a story. She began. About a flight I once took not as a CEO, but as a passenger. I sat quietly while someone decided I didn't belong in the seat I'd paid for. They judged me by what they saw, not who I was. The room was still. Naomi continued, her tone measured but emotional. That flight could have ended in anger. Instead, it became the reason Horizon Air changed forever. Because one act of arrogance taught us the value of dignity. She paused, meeting their eyes. You'll meet passengers who test your patience. Some will be kind, others won't. But your measure as a crew member isn't how you handle the easy moments. It's how you protect someone's humanity when no one else will. Amber watched her mentor speak, her eyes glistening. Eli nodded quietly from the corner, his weathered hands folded. Naomi finished softly. When you walk down that aisle, you don't just carry trays, you carry trust. Don't drop it. A hush followed. Then one of the recruits, a young man with trembling hands, spoke. Dr. Carter. Were you that passenger? Naomi smiled. Yes, and I'm grateful for it. Because that moment reminded me that titles mean nothing if you forget the ground you came from. Applause filled the room, genuine and lingering. When the session ended, Naomi lingered as Amber approached her. You didn't tell them everything. Did you? Naomi chuckled. They don't need the whole story, just the lesson. Amber smiled softly. Still, I think they felt it. Later that evening, Naomi drove to the waterfront. The sun dipped low over the Pacific, painting the sky in strokes of amber and violet. The rhythmic sound of waves mingled with distant jet engines overhead. She thought of all the storms that had shaped her, of the insults endured. The quiet strength it took to respond with dignity instead of rage. She thought of Tina's tears, Amber's courage, Eli's loyalty, each one a thread in the tapestry of redemption. Her phone buzzed once more. A message from Eli. You gave them their wings back, ma'am. I think the sky's finally ours again. Naomi smiled at the screen. For the first time in a long while, She let herself exhale fully. She whispered to the sea, "No, Eli, the sky was never ours. It belongs to everyone brave enough to rise." As another jet soared overhead, its contrail shimmering like a silver scar across twilight, she felt something deeper than pride, peace born from purpose. Her story had begun with insult, but it ended with impact. And in that quiet dusk, she finally understood true power isn't found in being served, it's found in serving well. The day dawned clear and golden, the kind of morning where the light seemed to forgive everything it touched. At Horizon Air's headquarters, anticipation filled the air. Today marked 1 year since the flight that changed everything, the one where humiliation became revelation and pain turned into purpose. Inside the grand conference hall, banners stretched across the walls. 1 year of Project Elevate Dignity in every journey. Executives, crew members, and staff from across the country gathered. Reporters filled the back rows, cameras poised, yet for Dr. Naomi Carter, who stood backstage holding her notes, none of that mattered. What mattered were the people, their growth, their healing, their courage. A gentle knock came at the door. Amber Lee peeked in, her smile bright but calm. "They're ready for you, Dr. Carter," Naomi smiled. "Ready as I'll ever be." Amber hesitated before adding softly, "You know, a year ago today, I almost quit aviation. I thought the skies didn't have space for kindness anymore. But now," she exhaled, "now it feels like home again." Naomi touched her shoulder gently. "That's why we're here, Amber, to make the skies feel like home for everyone." The auditorium fell silent as Naomi stepped onto the stage. The spotlight caught the silver pin on her lapel, a small pair of wings engraved with a single word, respect. "Good morning," she began, her tone warm yet steady. A year ago, Horizon Air was facing a storm not of weather, but of spirit. We'd lost something invisible but essential, the ability to see one another fully. Her gaze swept the room, pausing on familiar faces, Tina in the second row, Eli near the aisle, Helen beside the HR team. She continued, "That storm began on an ordinary flight, a simple journey that revealed extraordinary truths. It reminded us that kindness can't be outsourced, and dignity can't be delegated." The audience listened intently, many unaware that she was speaking of her own experience. Naomi took a slow breath. "I sat once as a passenger who was told, in so many words, that I didn't belong. What could have ended in anger instead became the start of something new. Because when people are unkind, we have two choices: to echo their noise or to answer with grace." A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. She smiled faintly. "We chose grace, and look where it brought us." Behind her, a large screen lit up images of crew members helping passengers, laughing, comforting frightened children. Real footage from Horizon flights, captured candidly. Laughter echoed softly through the hall as those moments played. When the video ended, Naomi turned back. Project Elevate wasn't about fixing policies. It was about mending hearts. And I can tell you now, the repair is holding strong. Applause filled the room, gentle but full of meaning. Naomi motioned to the front row. "I'd like to invite two people who embodied this change. They remind us what it means to fall, to rise, and to carry others higher." Amber Lee and Tina Collins joined her on stage, side by side. Tina looked nervous at first, but Naomi nodded encouragingly. Tina stepped forward. "A year ago, I was lost in my own pride. I thought authority meant control, but I learned that real leadership isn't about commanding others, it's about understanding them. Her voice faltered briefly. Dr. Carter could have ended my career that day. Instead, she chose to teach me. And because of that mercy, I found my way back not just to flying, but to humanity. Tears shimmered in her eyes as she stepped back. Amber followed, her tone soft but resolute. I used to think kindness was something you had to save for when people deserved it. Now I know it's the fuel that keeps us all in the air. The room erupted in applause. Even a few reporters wiped their eyes. Naomi smiled, her chest tight with pride. Thank you, both. You remind us that redemption isn't a story, it's a practice. After the ceremony, people mingled in the lobby, laughter and conversation mingling like music. Naomi stepped aside for a moment, finding a quiet spot by the window overlooking the runway. Beside her, Eli Sanders appeared, holding 2 cups of coffee. You didn't cry up there. I thought for sure you would. Naomi chuckled softly, not in front of cameras. He handed her a cup. So, what's next? Captain of the Skies. Naomi smiled at the nickname. Expansion. Project Elevate is going international. Helen's already drafting partnerships with other airlines. We're sharing our program freely. If dignity can cross borders, so should we. Eli nodded. You know, when I first met you, you were carrying a storm inside. I think it finally cleared. Naomi looked out at a departing jet. Storms don't disappear. Eli, they just teach you how to fly through them. He raised his cup. To that and to you, ma'am. She raised hers in return, to all of us. Later that evening, Naomi walked alone down the empty terminal. The lights were dim now, and the air smelled faintly of jet fuel and coffee. A cleaning crew waved as she passed. She stopped by Gate 14A, the very gate where, a year ago, her journey had begun. The memories came easily, Tina's sharp tone, the spilled water, the quiet humiliation she had swallowed instead of rage. She remembered the ache in her chest, not from insult, but from recognition that prejudice still lived quietly in places where it should have never belonged. And yet, standing there now, she felt no bitterness, only gratitude. She whispered to the empty space. We made it, as if answering. A plane roared overhead, its lights cutting through the darkness like hope made visible. Naomi smiled. The next morning, as sunlight poured through her office windows, Naomi found an envelope on her desk. No sender, just her name in neat handwriting. Inside was a note, Dr. Carter. You once said respect should never depend on who someone is. Thank you for proving it, because of you. I teach my students that the sky has room for everyone. A passenger from Flight 204, she read it twice, then placed it carefully in her journal beside a small photograph, one of Amber, Tina, Eli, and herself, all smiling under the Horizon logo. Closing the book, she whispered. Then it was all worth it. Outside, the engines of another flight began to hum. A voice on the intercom announced boarding. Naomi turned toward the window, watching the plane lift off into the blue morning. And for the first time in a long, long while, she didn't just see an aircraft. She saw a promise that the sky, like respect, belonged to everyone willing to rise. The story of Dr. Naomi Carter reminds us that dignity doesn't depend on position. It depends on how we treat others when no one's watching. Every encounter, no matter how small, holds the power to heal or to harm. In a world quick to judge and slow to listen, Naomi's grace teaches us that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks through silence, through patience, through choosing compassion over pride. For older generations who've seen the world change and sometimes lose its kindness, this story brings a quiet truth. Respect never grows old. It's timeless. Whether we're leading companies, families, or simply our own lives, we can all be the kind of person who restores faith in humanity, one gentle act at a time. When faced with cruelty, we can mirror it, or we can rise above it. Dr. Carter's choice reminds us that integrity is not about winning arguments, it's about keeping our hearts clean, even in the face of injustice. Thank you for watching and sharing your time with us today. If this story touched your heart or made you think, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of courage, empathy, and the quiet power of human kindness. See you in the next story.